Good morning, everyone. Kevin here from Skywatcher, and welcome to another episode of the What's Up Webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. It is the last webcast episode of 2023. So before we go any further, I just would like to thank all of you for being here and supporting our channel. The channel originally started when 2020 COVID hit. We weren't quite sure how we were going to stay relevant. We weren't even sure if we were going to have jobs at when March 2020 came around. So the webcast was really just there to kind of keep up with you guys. And, you know, we didn't know how long it was going to be. So we kind of just did it on a whim, and it's evolved into what you see now. So a lot of that is in part because of the support that you guys have shown us. So thank you very much for all your support over the last, I think 3 years at this point. But we definitely appreciate it, and we're not planning on stopping anytime soon. So thank you very much for yet another awesome year of supporting the channel. If you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe. We have finally broke the 10,000 subscriber mark too. So thanks to all of you for making that possible and supporting the channel. And it's always fun just hanging out with you guys on Friday and seeing what's going on in the chat. So hopefully you enjoy it too. And next year should be just as awesome, if not even better. So thanks again for another year of hanging out with us, and all of you who have met us in person, and the kind words that you've given us about the webcast. We really appreciate that as well. If you want to support the webcast even further, please leave a like on a video, subscribe to the channel, or you can head over to the skywatcher.threadless.com store, which we've got up on the screen here. There's all kinds of cool shirts available up there, and you can go ahead and check that out. That's skywatcher.threadless.com, or you can get something that matches up with the product that you're getting for the holidays. But there you go. So if you want to support the channel, we really appreciate it in that way as well. We have a lot of cool stuff coming in 2024. A lot of that will probably be unveiled officially for the first webcast of the year, which currently will be January 5th. That will be the first webcast of the year. So that'll be a what's up for the month, but there's a ton of cool stuff that we're hoping to unveil, including the new totem patches. And we'll have some cool stuff there for you. So anyway, thanks very much for all the support that you guys have given us over the last couple of years. 2024 should be awesome. Hopefully we'll have some new products to show off for you, and we'll be talking about some new 2024 stuff very, very soon. So anyway, so for the last episode of the month, we're going to be choosing a catadioptric telescope for visual. Now, there's a lot of different designs within this wheelhouse and this family of telescopes. So we're going to kind of go into it. I will see if we use the whole hour. We probably will. I tend to make that work. But anyway, if you have questions, throw them up in the chat. Be happy to answer any of those. So let's get started. So we're all very familiar with the basic designs. There's refractors. They use lenses. We did an episode about choosing a refractor for visual. If you want to go back on there and check that out, you can have a good one there. And you can learn about that. So now we're going to do Cassegrains. And this should be an interesting one. It's taken a little bit of time to refresh myself on some of these optical systems. All right, so we're all familiar with compound and Cassegrain telescopes. They're widely available in different designs. Of course, these telescopes mainly use mirrors, but they can also incorporate lenses as well. Our boss, Jeff, likes to call them refractors. Refractors is the running joke inside of Skywatcher. So the new design that we need to tell everyone about is refractor. So run it with that as you will. And some of them technically aren't far from that. Like a Riccardi Honders refracts and reflects at the same time. So refractor is the running joke inside Skywatcher. Moving on. So most Cassegrains, they have a primary, they have a secondary, and then they focus out the back, which is known as the Cassegrain focus. And then they can use a variety of different optical configurations and lenses to address certain aberrations. So these come in a wide range of designs, and they can be used for a lot of different applications. Now, today's episode, we're going to be primarily focusing on visual approaches, not so much on the astrophotography side of things. Oh, well, it will come up because some of these designs are intended for astrophotography, but they can still be used for visual. So a lot of the common Cassegrain sizes on the market nowadays, despite the design, are 3-inch, 3.5-inch up to about 16-inch. Common designs are like the Maksutov and the Schmid-Cassegrains, which we're all very familiar with, but there's some other variations. You can get these bigger. If we incorporate some of the other designs and other companies, you can go up to a 1 meter or bigger, depending on how much money you want to throw at it. So common sizes for us mortals, I would say, are 3.5-inch to 16-inch. If you've got the pockets deep enough, you can certainly go bigger than 16 if you've got the money for it. But does it make sense visually? We'll see. But sizes vary completely on the design of the telescope itself. So let's talk about one of the most common Cassegrains on the market, and that, of course, is the Schmidt-Cassegrain. So the Schmidt-Cassegrain, and even within this arena and this particular design, there are variations of it. So the Schmidt-Cassegrain uses what's known as a Schmidt corrector up at the front. The light relays back to your spherical primary, up to a spherical secondary, and out the back to the focus point. Now, a lot of us are very, very aware of a Schmidt-Cassegrain, Celestron being one of the two major manufacturers of Schmidts on the market, and they come in a variety of sizes. Celestron moving between 5-inch to 14-inch, and then there's other manufacturers that go a little bit larger. But there are variations within it. So a Schmidt-Cassegrain is a very basic design. However, the Schmidt corrector plate is rather difficult to produce unless done in certain ways. And if you could figure out how to mass produce a Schmidt corrector, it's a very effective telescope. Although it is a hard one to actually figure because it's basically a lens that has a figure on it. So the Schmidt corrector is a very complicated thing to make unless you can figure out how to make it. Basically what it does is it throws spherical aberration into the system, and then you have these spherical mirrors basically eat up so the spherical correction. Now, you can still get off-axis aberrations from a Schmidt-Cassegrain, and that's why there are other corrected Schmidt-Cassegrains, such as like the Edge HDs or, the Mead ACF designs. Those ones I would call advanced Schmidt-Cassegrains or corrected Schmidt-Cassegrains. You can depending on what they're doing with it, sometimes they're using an aspherical secondary to adjust some of that. And basically what you're going to find in today's thing is Cassegrains are all kind of honed in around the same thought process. It's all just about how do we correct spherical aberration and coma. That's basically the name of the game with these various Cassegrain designs. So Schmidt-Cassegrain is incredibly well received. They're easy to obtain in various sizes. The nice thing about a Schmidt is it's also a fairly well corrected system, and they're small. They're fairly compact for their sizes. Some other Cassegrains can be fairly long. So a Schmidt-Cassegrain gives you a fairly well corrected telescope, depending on the design, and a very decent aperture and a compact package. So let me bring this up really quick. Here we go. So let's start with the Schmidt-Cassegrain. So Celestron's got two different types of Schmidt-Cassegrains on the market. Of course, there's the standard design, and then there's the Edge HDs. So a standard Schmidt is just like what we were talking about, has a correct Schmidt corrector up in the front, spherical primary, spherical secondary out the back to the focus point. Works very well, has pretty good on-axis performance, and even off-axis, the stars are pretty decent, but you can get some kind of coma as you move towards the outer edges. And that can be more noticeable when using wide-angle eyepieces or if you've got a camera. Now, the Edge HD design that they make corrects for all of that, so it gives you a very pinpoint design as well as flat field. So they're excellent for not only visual use, but they're also highly designed, pretty much designed for imaging. So the Edge HD is a Schmidt corrector, spherical primary. I believe it's a aplanatic or aspherical kind of secondary. Plus, it has a corrector in the baffle tube, which helps flatten the field and gives you that pinpoint star to the very edge. So for most people, an Edge HD is probably going to be overkill for visual. You would have to have the standard Schmidt side by side. Yes, I had a conniption fit, Spherical. It was just the last one for the year, so my brain wasn't quite working. So that's a new optical figure there, Spherical. So you're welcome. Developed by Smeagol in Lord of the Rings. So there you go. Who knew he was an optician? So you have the basic Schmidt-Cassegrain, good on axis, decent off axis performance, but not ideal. Then we move up to the Edge HD, flat field, well corrected across it, but you pay for it. And then you have something like the ACF design, which corrects for coma, but it's not flat field. And that uses spherical and an aspheric secondary up top, so it's good on axis. And they're actually pretty nice for wider field eyepieces as well, giving you those nice pinpoint stars. So all of those are going to work fine for visual use. And if you're just looking for a decent telescope that's got some good aperture and it's compact, a basic Schmidt-Cassegrain is going to be perfectly fine for you. And the nice thing about it is you can get them up to 14 and 16 inch apertures, which are pretty serious sizes, especially if you've got an observatory in the backyard and you want something cool to put in there. So that's the Schmidt design. Now, next one is the next most common one that we see on the market here is the Maksutov-Cassegrain. Now, the Maksutov-Cassegrain does use spherical optics, very similar to a Schmidt-Cassegrain, but to correct for that spherical aberration, rather than using a Schmidt corrector, it uses a Maksutov or meniscus corrector in the front. Now, one of the major issues with a Maksutov-Cassegrain is those meniscus lenses are thick, and they can be very difficult to make. For example, a C8 Schmidt-Cassegrain, it has that corrector plate in the front, and it's fairly, I don't even think it's not even a quarter of an inch thick. It's a fairly thin piece of glass, where, let's say, the Skywatcher SkyMax 180, which is a Maksutov-Cassegrain and 7-inch aperture, the corrector in the front is nearly an inch thick. It is a chunk of glass, so it's quite heavy to work with, and it can be difficult making something like that on a larger scale. So the Schmidt-Cassegrains, a Schmidt corrector plate, you are still limited on how big you can make that, but it's easier for them to make because the glass isn't so thick. Where moving up to a Mac-Cassegrain, that corrector is a lot harder to figure and a lot harder to make due to how thick the glass actually is. So you don't find many large aperture Maksutovs on the market. Usually the 7-inch is about as big as you go, but you can get them bigger. The biggest one I'm aware of is a 20-inch or 500 millimeter aperture, which is a humongous corrector. I can't even imagine how thick and heavy that meniscus corrector actually is. The nice thing about Maksutovs is they are fairly pinpoint to the edge of the field of view. One of the reasons being there is that it is getting the spherical correction corrected because of that meniscus corrector, but they tend to be longer in focal length. So where a Schmidt tends to be faster. Most Schmidt-Cassegrains on the market are f10. Most Maksutov-Cassegrains on the market are f12 and longer. Now, the advantage of having that longer F ratio means your secondary is smaller. Now, this is critical when you're doing planetary viewing, because a smaller secondary means improved contrast because you're not scattering as much light. A lot of telescopes that are designed for imaging purposes are trying to illuminate a very large sensor, so their secondaries are quite large. And for imaging, that's not really the end of the world. You can get around it. You can shrink stars and do all kinds of editing and make them look better. But it does hinder your view of high power viewing because it scatters the light. Now, I'm sure the views are still awesome and they still look great, especially on larger instruments, but a larger secondary does tend to scatter more light, so it can definitely harm your contrast. So there's the Schmidt-Cassegrains. Schmidt-Cassegrains have a larger secondary because they're also at f10. So the Maksutovs are generally well known to provide better planetary viewing because of that smaller secondary. They're very refractor-esque. However, you're limited on their apertures. So if you want something that's a bit bigger than a 7-inch and you want something compact, your Schmidt-Cassegrain is going to probably be the way to go because they're readily available and fairly affordable in, a 9-inch, a 10-inch, 11, 12, 14, 16. You can readily get those. Where a Mac, you can find them, but they're really expensive. So first one was the Schmidt-Cassegrains. Great telescope, highly available, larger secondary, scatters a little bit more light. And if you want the off-axis performance for your wide-angle eyepieces, the best corrected versions are going to cost you a little bit more money, like the Edge HD or the ACF. Coming to a Maksutov-Cassegrain, they're fairly well corrected. They're generally longer focal length, higher in contrast, more ideal for the lunar and planetary observer, and they're pretty well corrected off to the edge of the field of view, but you're limited on the aperture sizes. So that's where we go from there. Now, there are several other designs as well, and obviously, let me pop this up just because I got to represent us. If you're looking for a nice Maksutov-Cassegrain, let me take this time to let you know that most of our Maksutov-Cassegrains are currently available and on sale. So we have all the way from our little 90 all the way up to the 180 Mac Cass. And you can go on our website if you want to buy them. Doesn't actually look like a lot of them are available. You could also check dealers as well. So just because we don't have them on our website doesn't mean our dealers don't have them too. But if you're looking for a nice little Maksutov-Cassegrain, we make a wide range of them. So you can go over there and check that out. All right. Let's see. Moving on. Now, let's start with the granddaddy of the Cassegrains, the classical Cassegrain. A classical Cassegrain uses a parabolic primary and a hyperbolic secondary. Now, classical Cassegrains are excellent for planets, but they do suffer from off-axis aberrations like coma. The parabolic primary basically eliminates the spherical aberrations that you would see because it doesn't use a sphere. Okay, I'll get to that question here in a minute. These primary mirrors are parabolic, so it's going to correct any spherical aberrations, and then the secondary is hyperbolic, which can be a little bit of a beast to work with because hyperbolics are really critical as far as their collimation goes. But with this particular design, they're a bit critical to work with. You don't see too many classical Cassegrains on the market. But GSO, or Guanxing is the name of the company, they sell several. I'm just going to bring up Agena because they have them. You can get the GSO classical Cassegrain reflectors. I think they make a couple different sizes. I think there's like a 6, 8, and 10. These are really nice telescopes. They're really good for on-axis performance, but they aren't going to suffer as you move off-axis to do any of that off-axis work. So that's something that you're going to have to deal with. Now, there are some interesting old school telescopes. Takahashi had one. Cave had one. but because these use a parabolic primary, these do have the ability to be converted to a Newtonian. Some of them have a design where you can switch the secondary mirror out and move it to a Newtonian telescope. So you get a Newtonian and a Cassegrain all in one. They're fairly rare nowadays because, quite frankly, people just don't need to be messing with optics. But you can still find them if you're looking for one of those like modular design kind of things. Now there's a question here. Why are catadioptrics mostly f10? Is there a reason for this? You can make a Cassegrain faster, but the secondary gets larger. And usually the only reason that you're going to speed up a Cassegrain is for speed for photographic purposes. Now that can be more tedious because you start getting bigger and bigger secondaries. So a lot of telescopes on the market right now are designed to kind of be a hybrid for both visual and imaging. So they have to kind of work within the confines that they're going to sell those. So most Cassegrains tend to be a little bit longer, but you could speed them up. That's why like a plane wave is f7 or even f6.8. So you can speed them up, but the secondaries do get bigger depending on what the purpose of the telescope is. So happy medium is right around f10, f8, but you can make it whatever you want realistically. But the bigger the secondary, the more ideal they are for photographic use and not visual. So to kind of keep the piece in the middle there, you want to make sure it's kind of multi-roll. So that's going back. This is the classical Cassegrain. Like I said, you can get this design from GSO. I think there's some other custom companies that will make you a classical Cassegrain if you really want one. These are really nice on axis, but off axis, they're going to have a little bit of an issue. And you really have to pay attention to that hyperbolic secondary mirror because those are pretty critical as far as their spacing goes. Let's see. Next up is the Dall-Kirkham. Dall-Kirkhams, they exist and they're more common than you probably think. Now, a Dall-Kirkham is a very forgiving telescope to work with because it has a spherical secondary and an elliptical primary. So in the order of difficulty as far as making a mirror, you have a sphere, which is the easiest one. Then you go ellipse or elliptoid or elliptical is the second easiest. And then from there you go to parabola and then hyperbolic. So a spherical mirror is going to put all kinds of spherical aberrations into the view. And there are ways to correct that if you want. You can make it longer focal length because the faster that primary is, and this is probably another reason, honestly, why a lot of telescopes in this design are f8, f10 or longer, is particularly like a Schmidt-Cassegrain, it's a spherical primary mirror. Now, the faster you make that sphere, the more corrective optics that are going to need. So a sphere is very easy to make, and you can make them as big as you want, but the faster that mirror actually is, the harder it's going to be to correct for spherical aberrations. So to get rid of that, you can make a corrector or you can make a parabola. A parabola doesn't have spherical aberration, and an elliptical reduces that a bit more. But the parabolic mirror is going to correct for the spherical aberration, but then you get coma. So then you're gonna need a way to correct for the coma, like a coma corrector or something like that. So you can always add lenses to correct for the field. So a standard Dall-Kirkham uses an elliptical mirror and a spherical primary mirror, and these are fairly forgiving telescopes. The spacing is not ultra critical like some of these other designs. They're a bit easier to use, and they're great for planetary because on axis they're very sharp. Now, probably the most famous of these telescopes, if you're looking for a Dall-Kirkham design, would be the Takahashi Mulons. Now, they've made Mulons in several different sizes. Currently, they make the Mulon 180, the Mulon 210. There is a Mulon 250, but I don't think they sell the standard. There's a Mulon 300 as well. And Takahashi used to make a 16-inch classical Cassegrain as well. They might still be able to get it if you had deep enough pockets and you really wanted it. But if you're looking for a standard Dall-Kirkham, These are generally longer focal length telescopes. They make a 180, so a 7-inch, and then they make a 210, so like an 8.2-inch, somewhere in there. These are very nice telescopes. I have some friends that have them. They take a little time to cool off and adapt, but they're very nice telescopes overall. Their website's awfully sparse for tech information. I'm not here to kind of sit here and tear anybody's website apart, but these are great telescopes. They do use a spider to hold the secondary in place, so you are going to get diffraction spikes on some of the brighter objects. One of the major advantages of, say, like a Mac or a Schmidt-Cassegrain is because they use some kind of optical element to hold the secondary, like their correctors. You don't have any diffraction spikes at that point. So there's a little bit less scatter there that gets annoying. So the Mulons, you'll just have to be aware that you are going to have diffraction spikes with these. Now, I believe the 180 has 3 arms or 3 vanes that actually support the secondary, so you're going to get 6 diffraction spikes. And I think the 210 on up uses 4, so you get more of a traditional 4 spikes. So that's something that you need to be aware of if diffraction spikes are your mortal enemy, which some people take it that serious. So, but the Mulon design or a Dall-Kirkham is going to be great for planetary and on-axis work, if that's what you're looking to do. But if you're using wide-angle eyepieces, you're probably going to see a little bit of optical aberrations towards the edge of the field of view. Now, moving up, there's the modified version, which is the corrected Dall-Kirkham. This has been made famous by Planewave. Now these, or CDK. Now these are the same thing. They have an elliptical primary, spherical secondary, so they're very easy to produce as far as optics go. But these have a built-in corrector to flatten the field and kind of clean up any last-minute aberrations in the baffle tube. So when you have a CDK telescope, and there's other manufacturers, Planewave, Takahashi does offer Mulons in a corrected Dall-Kirkham format where they put correctors in the baffle tube. So you can buy, I think the 250 and the 300 now are only available for Mulons. Let's see, reflectors. Yeah, so here's the corrected ones, the CRS series. Same thing, it's a Mulon, typical Mulon, but inside the baffle tube in front of the focus point, you have some correctors that sit in the baffle tube there and basically give you a corrected field. So and one of those, it looks like this one actually is using a triplet design right here. So you do have some ED glass, so it's going to cost you some money. But they do make these corrected Cassegrain or corrected Dall-Kirkhams. If you want the 250 or the 300, they've got those there as well. So there's different designs out there depending on what you want to do. But of course, we all know that Planewave has made the major stride to produce the CDK system. Now these, you have to keep in mind that these are really designed for astrophotography purposes. They could make longer focal length where the F ratios are allowing for a smaller secondary mirror. But this is what we were talking about earlier, where because these are designed for large format cameras, the secondary mirrors on these are rather large. So your light scatter is going to probably reduce the capability of what they can do visually. However, that does not mean they are a slouch for visual use. However, if you're spending this kind of money on one of these telescopes, you probably know what you want to do. And visual is probably a little further down the line than you're liking. So, however, there are observatories like Lowell Observatory up in Flagstaff. They have a 24-inch Planewave, and it's pretty much used for visual purposes. So you can use them for visual just fine. They're probably not as ideal for visual as, say, some other scopes would be, but if you need a compact 24-inch that fits in a dome, there you go. Go get a corrected Dall-Kirkham there, because they make them up to 1 meter. So you can do it. You can do it perfectly fine. Any telescope can basically be used for visual use, but these are more ideal for the astrophotographer and research level stuff, not so much for visual. But if you need it, you can get it. But with these corrected Dall-Kirkhams, you're getting rid of everything. You're getting rid of coma, and you're getting rid of spherical aberrations, and it's flat field as well. So the view through these is probably quite nice, and pinpoint to the edge of the field of view. So not a bad way to go, just an expensive way to go. But these are fairly easy to make, and they're also easy to figure. The mirrors, they don't have to be ultra critical. So Dall-Kirkhams and corrected Dall-Kirkhams, you've got some leeway to work with those systems, where a classical Cassegrain, because of that hyperbolic secondary, is a little difficult to contend with, and collimation can be a bit more critical. Collimation is obviously critical with any telescope, but it becomes more difficult when we start talking hyperbolics. So that brings us to one of the most complicated ones, and this is the RC, or the Ritchey-Chrétien. This is a complete hyperbolic system, primary and secondary. Now, like the CDKs, these were designed for well-corrected research in astrophotography. The Hubble Space Telescope is an RC. Now, hyperbolic mirrors don't suffer from spherical, and they don't suffer from coma, but they're not flat field systems. They're nice, but they are not natively flat. So if we're talking about astrophotography, you're going to need probably a flattener to get the top performance for this for photography purposes. But we're not talking photography, we're talking visual. So the trick with Ritchey-Chrétiens is you're spending a lot of money on these because they're corrected for photography. Now, these are a complete reflecting design. There's no lenses. Most of the time, there's no lenses in these. So these are great for research purposes because they don't have lenses in them. So if you're doing spectra and stuff like that, you're not going to have issues with those lenses adding any aberration into it just because the mirrors adjust for it. Now, there are corrected Ritcheys out there. They're probably sped up a bit. They have a larger image circle for imaging purposes, but Ritchey-Chrétiens are complicated because they're hyperbolic mirrors. Now, talking to a few friends of mine that are opticians, generally the way that you make an RC is first, you have to make the secondary, and then you make the primary matched to the secondary mirror. Because with hyperbolics, if you can imagine them, they're figured more like a V. They're still a curve, but they look more like a V, or a hyperbolas look more like a V, or a parabolic is more like a U. That's a little tighter U, where ellipses and spheres are more like a ball, if you will. So because of the way hyperbolic figures are, it's very, very critical that the mirrors are in the right spot. Now, alignment on most of these telescopes is going to be critical, but hyperbolics probably take the gold for complexity as far as their alignment needs to be. So you can use an RC for visual, but they are mainly intended for imaging purposes. And of course, you can get those GSO Ritcheys out there if you want to mess with those. There used to be a big company out there called RCOS. They're no longer, but their lineage still lives on. And you can find them on the used market occasionally. And they made them up to 32 or 34 inch telescopes there. They're really cool looking telescopes, though. Here's the open truss carbon that they made. These you can use for visual if you want. You're going to be paying a lot of money for a scope that's really intended for photography, but they work just fine. If you ever go up to Mount Lemmon Sky Center in Tucson for their viewing, they have a 24 and a 32 inch RCOS RC telescopes up there. No one's going to argue with the views that those telescopes throw down. So really what it comes down to is most Cassegrain designs can effectively be used for visual. However, there are a lot of modern designs or larger systems out there that really exist for the astrophotographer. So from a visual perspective, the only reason that you should be buying a plane wave for just straight visual use is if you need a Cassegrain design that has large aperture. Most of the time you can go get a Schmid-Cassegrain from Celestron, a C14, very impressive instrument. I've had a few of them. Nice big instrument, decently well corrected, and fairly affordable off the shelf. Now, if for whatever reason you need more aperture to see farther out in space and you need to fit in a compact spot, then maybe you go pick up one of these larger Cassegrains. But a lot of times, because a lot of reasons why these larger Cassegrains exist are for astrophotography purposes. So you're spending extra money on an optical system that is really intended for photography. So it's a lot like buying a camera nowadays. A lot of these Canon or Nikon or Sony's or whatever have the ability to do pictures, but they also have the ability to do video. A lot of us don't need the video feature, but regardless, you're paying for it, whether you need it or not, because it just comes into play. That's exactly the same thing with these specialized telescopes like an RC or a corrected Dall-Kirkham or these large aperture systems, as most of the companies that are making them for research and photographic purposes. So visual is just further down the list. They're just as effective. They work well. Their optics are probably killer. And the views are probably excellent. But you're paying a lot more money for features that are really designed for visual or imaging purposes. You thought the RC was just for imaging. No, you can use an RC visually if you want. They work. They focus light, just like any other Cassegrain does. However, the thing about an RC is they're really intended for imaging purposes, because those hyperbolic mirrors are correcting for the coma and off-axis performance. You're paying a lot more for a lot harder system that's really intended for imaging. It's correcting for image aberrations that the cameras are going to pick up a lot more. That being said, you can easily slap an eyepiece on the back of these as long as you can come to focus. So an RC works just fine. So if you have one of these GSO RCs or these cheap little RCs, you can put an eyepiece on the back of them, but I wouldn't go out of my way to buy an RC for the sake of visual purposes. If you have one and you want to put an eyepiece on it, great. I'm sure it will work just fine. The secondaries are a little large, so you might see some aberrations when it comes to viewing. The planets and stuff like that are probably not going to have as high of contrast as, say, something like a Mac of similar aperture or even a Schmidt, but it'll work. So now, you beat me to it. How are the views of a Cassegrain versus a refractor in deep sky objects? Well, let's talk about refractors and reflectors for deep sky targets. So as we all know, deep sky targets, it's all about aperture. You want as much light as possible. Now, the advantage of refractors is they don't have any secondary obstruction, so they're really contrasty telescopes. And I actually think a refractor can make up what it lacks in aperture, what it brings in contrast. So if we have a refractor, let's say we have a 6-inch refractor versus like a 6-inch Cassegrain. The 6-inch refractor is probably going to provide a better view because it's using all the aperture without any obstruction. There's no degradation of it because there's light scatter. So a large refractor probably will easily beat a Cassegrain in similar aperture sizes. But like most designs, it's limited in aperture. So I have a 6-inch Esprit and I have a Stellar View 180 7-inch triplet. They're fantastic telescopes. And man, are they sharp. But at the end of the day, it's a 6-inch and a 7-inch telescope. It's just physics. So if I put those up against a 12-inch Newtonian or a 12-inch Cassegrain, you're going to be able to see more in the Cassegrain. That's just more light coming in. But the images and the refractors tend to be sharper. They are insanely sharp. The stars are needle points. And that's why a lot of times you hear people say refractor-like images. So if you want a refractor-like image and you don't have the budget for it, you want to find a Cassegrain, or in this point, I'm trying to keep it more on topic. You want to find a Cassegrain that has the smallest secondary possible, because you want that contrast. So you're probably looking at a Maksutov, because a lot of times those are available, or a classical Cassegrain. But the Maksutov is going to be corrected out to the field of view, or say like a classical Cassegrain or a Dall-Kirkham design, you will have aberrations out towards the edge. So, but it depends on what your budget is for your telescope. Because at the end of the day, aperture wins for deep sky purposes. So a lot of times that's why people are picking up like a C8 or the 9 1/4 or the 11. Those telescopes are so affordable, and they're compact, and they're easy to work with. And a lot of times they come with a little go-to mount for them as well, that if you want a telescope that's just all around nice, an 8-inch Schmid-Cassegrain works just fine. You've got aperture, so you can see out into space. You've got the focal length, so your image scale for the planets and even some of the fainter stuff is decent size. And the views are pretty decent. So that's why you see so many Schmidt-Cassegrains out in the world, because they blend all of those features that visual people want. You want the aperture, you want it to be compact, you've also got some nice focal length, and the Schmidt-Cassegrain has a moving primary mirror inside, so you've got a lot of room to focus stuff. So you could put bino viewers on it, you could put eyepieces on it, and you can put cameras on it. So the Schmidt-Cassegrain is probably the most multi-role design on the market, because you get all those features that you want. The Maksutov-Cassegrain is a little bit more limited, but they tend to be higher contrast per size, because a lot of times their secondaries are smaller, so you get more improved contrast. What about a Maksutov-Newtonian? Maksutov-Newtonians... Mac Newtonians are very nice. They give you that refractor-like view. They're very sharp, and there's some amazing Mac Newtonians out there, especially like the Saravallo ones, if you can find them. The 145, or better yet, the 216. Those will perform like a big refractor, but they have really tiny secondary mirrors. So a Mac Newtonian is still doable as well. They're great telescopes. And the nice thing about a Mac Newtonian is they don't have a secondary mirror that's magnifying. So they're going to give you a shorter focal length and a wider field of view. So, but they're awesomely sharp. They're just not quite as versatile. Now, so yeah, with that being said, if you're looking for a nice visual telescope, just all around nice, doesn't excel at any particular thing, the Schmidt-Cassegrain is probably the way to go. It works good for imaging. It does okay for imaging. It does okay for visual. It does okay for all the uses. It just does not excel in any particular way. It's just a nice all-around system. So Schmidt-Cassegrains are the way to go. Now, if you want that refractor-like view and you want something sharp, and it's a little bit more specified, particularly if you're into double stars and planetary and lunar, a good Mac Cassegrain is probably going to be a slight level up over a Schmidt. So if you're into planets, you're into the bright stuff, and you don't need big aperture, the Mac Cass is an excellent telescope for visual. Now, going along those routes, if you're really particular and you're into all that as well, and you don't mind diffraction spikes, then go look at a classical Cassegrain, or go look at a Dall-Kirkham. They're just not really mass-produced designs. So you can be limited on them, but you can get some larger apertures because they're only using mirrors rather than that big meniscus. The meniscus on a Mac is what holds it back, because you probably won't find ones that are much larger than 7-inch in aperture, and if they are, they're big, expensive, and cumbersome. That's where something like a classical Cassegrain or a Dall-Kirkham will give you that aperture jump to an extent, and that's why you can get a Dall-Kirkham or a classical in 8, 10, or 12-inch apertures from the manufacturers, but it's just not a popular design. So you're probably going to pay a little bit of a premium for them. And ideally, those are still going to be, planets, double stars, stuff that's isolated in the center of the field of view, realistically. And then, of course, like I said, then we get to the corrected Dall-Kirkham and the Ritchey-Chrétien. Those are really designed for astrophotography purposes, and the only real reason you should be using those for visual is because you probably already own it and you just want to use it in a visual format. Nothing wrong with that, but I would not recommend going out of your way to buy a CDK or an RC for the strict use of visual. You want to be an imager and occasionally use it for visual. There you go. Unless there's some very specific need that you're limited on your observatory space, which is probably the only reason, then you can go get something like a big RC or a big plane wave, because you want a big visual instrument, but you're limited on space. Then maybe that's a reason to go get it. So, but yeah, so really, you can do whatever you want. Cassegrains are very universal telescopes. They're all great designs. It doesn't matter who you buy it from. It doesn't matter what the design is. There's just certain designs that are slightly better for certain applications. So you start to split hairs a bit. So if you're really into planets, Schmid-Cassegrain, Max. If you're really into planets, Schmid-Cassegrains, Maksutovs, all the designs work. If you want just a general all-around use, Schmid-Cassegrains are going to be the one. If you're into lunar and planetary and you want it corrected to the edge, a Maksutov is what you want. If you're really particular on axis, you don't mind diffraction spikes, then the Dall-Kirkham or the classical. The classical is going to be a little bit harder to work with because you have that hyperbolic secondary to deal with. And if you just happen to be an imager, you've got some money to play with, RC or CDK, perfect applications for visual, but visual will be second on the list. So, cool. So if you guys have any questions, now's the time to do it, because that's pretty much it. So if you like what you see here on the What's Up Webcast, please go ahead and subscribe, leave a like. We are looking for ideas for next year, so write to us, info@skywatcherusa.com, title it What's Up. Looking for ideas for next year episodes. Please go ahead and subscribe, leave a like on the channel. We really appreciate all that as well. But that is pretty much it for the year. That's it. We're done. Again, we all really appreciate you guys supporting us and watching every Friday, and all those who actually go watch it after. We appreciate all of you there. But yeah, I hope this was information that you guys enjoyed. So with that being said, next 2 weeks, we will have no What's Up Webcast. We're going to take a break, go spend time with our families. That's been a really busy year, and next year is going to be nuts because we have the eclipse in April. So April will be in Texas for the Texas Star Party eclipse event. So if you're looking where Skywatcher is going to be, we will be at the Texas Star Party event in April for the total solar eclipse, and then like a week and a half or two later, we're going to be at NEAF. So that's going to be fun. And then we'll see how the rest of the year goes. So if you're looking to see where Skywatcher is going to go, that's where we'll be in the springtime. And looking forward to seeing you guys there. So the next What's Up Webcast is January 5th, 2024. That is the first What's Up for the month of the year. New totem patch. And we have shipped all the totem patches up until we wrap December up, and then we'll ship the last of the 2023 patches, and then we'll unveil 2024. So on January 5th, and hopefully have some cool other announcements for you guys there. So once again, thanks very much for hanging out with us. We hope you have a safe holiday season, regardless of what holiday you celebrate or if you do it at all. Please have a safe time. Stay warm out there. And other than that, that's it. So thanks all for watching. If you need something cool, go over to the skywatcher.threadless.com store. Pick some of that cool swag up to go along with your stuff. And that's about all I have to say about that. And then there's a ton of stuff on sale. So if you need something for the holidays, head over to our skywatcherusa.com. Pick up some stuff or buy it from your favorite dealer. There's still time to get your stuff, but not much longer. So, all right, guys. Thanks for watching. Have a great holiday season. We will see you guys back here on January 5th, 2024. Have safe holidays. Don't blow your hand off on New Year's. Need all the digits for next year. So we'll see you guys next year. Clear skies, and thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.